So this happened to me one crisp autumn morning while I was walking to my bus stop when I was a freshman in high school. I played the cello and my school orchestra had signed up to play in a local school orchestra festival that day. So I was a bit dolled up with makeup, a nice twisted hairdo, a floor-length black dress, and a pair of shiny flat black suede shoes. I decided not to take my cello and use my school's cello instead to avoid the risk of damage and theft. Well, it turns out that my cello wasn't the only thing I needed to worry about being damaged or stolen that day. I said goodbye to my family as I rushed out the door, binder in arm and backpack in tow. When I got past the edge of my lot, a white, unmarked delivery van without a license plate drove past me and slowed down for a moment, as if the driver was looking at something. Warily, I quickened my pace as I watched the van drive to the end of my cul-de-sac and turn around. I noticed that the van was hanging back a ways and going very slowly. So I thought to myself, okay, this is creepy, and I walked even faster. Then the unthinkable happened. I tripped over my dress, and my binder went flying out in front of me, spilling some of its contents. I heard the van speed up behind me as I scrambled to pick everything up with my bloody hands and run away. But it was too late. The van had caught up to me. The driver opened his window and asked, "Are you okay? Do you need a ride to school?" He looked to be about 35 to 40 years old, had ear-length reddish-brown hair, brown eyes, and a skinny build. His eyes were bloodshot and his movements were very slow, as if he was tweaking out on some sort of stimulant. "I'm fine," I said. "Just leave me alone." "Are you sure you don't want to ride?" he called as I walked away. "Yes, I'm sure. Now stop bothering me before I call the police," I exclaimed as I tried to run away. Thankfully, my dad's friend was working in his front yard and came to my aid when he realized I was in trouble. The creep tried to convince him that he was just trying to help me, but seeing how distressed I was and the fact that he kept following me, put up his red flags and he did not buy it. My dad's friend told me to run inside and get washed up while he called the police. As I did that, the creep tried to get out of his van when my dad's friend slammed the door shut, saying, "If you get out of this van and you try to hurt that girl, I will beat your sorry ass. You need to leave now." So I told my dad's friend that I still wanted to catch the bus, thinking that being among friends would help me calm down. So he agreed to watch over me until the bus got there. There was one other girl at the stop, and that was some comfort, but the creep had the nerve to come back. When he drove by the second time, I ran for the nearest ditch and started sobbing. I was scared for my life. I had previously been in a 6.8 earthquake, and this experience was 10 times scarier than that. The other girl at the bus stop ran over to me, asking what was wrong, and I told her what had just happened. She stayed there with me until my dad's friend raced down there in his truck. We waited until the bus came to make sure that the other girl and the other students who came later got on the bus safely. Once I got to school, I told the campus police officer what happened and tearfully gave him the best description of the creep and his vehicle as I could. Thankfully, he was caught later that day while I was at school, and I thanked the campus police officer profusely for getting that search started. Turns out the creep had been living in my neighborhood for about a year. He could have been watching me for that long and I didn't even know it. This is an experience I would not wish on my worst enemy. For months afterwards, I was so afraid to walk by myself in my own neighborhood that my parents had to walk or drive me to my bus stop and wait because going by myself meant having flashbacks and embarrassing panic attacks. So this creep may not have taken me, but he took away my ability to feel safe, and it took me a long time to gain that back. So to the creep who did this to me, why? 13 years ago, when I was young, I lived on a small farm. My best friend Zach, who lived down the road from me, and myself used to go in the woods to play. Since we lived in the country, there was almost nothing to do. We would always explore and pretend to be treasure hunters. I always used to take my dad's old cowboy hat, and Zach would take his small shovel every day, and we would always go a bit deeper into the forest every time we went. We usually managed to find something interesting in the woods, like old coins, water bottles, some nice-looking stones, and so on. While this was fun at the time, some creepy stuff started happening later on. One day while we were exploring the forest again, we came across a well, and we got really excited, thinking we actually found something good. So we checked it out, but there was nothing special and the well was dry. We pretty much got our hopes up for nothing, so we headed back home and another day was over. Well, the next day was a Friday, and when we got back home from school, Zach went back to his house and I went back to mine. Not long after having lunch, Zach was at the door. So I grabbed my dad's hat and opened the door. When I opened it, Zach was there with 2 other boys. They were much bigger than me and Zach. Zach introduced them as his cousins, saying they were staying with his mom and dad for the weekend. Their names were Danny and Simon, and they were both 15, so about 2 years older than me and Zach. They wanted to come back with me and Zach into the woods, so I agreed. So we went there, and it was just a normal day for the most part, but Zach's cousins were total jerks, saying it sucked being in the woods and asking us how we never got bored out there. Later that night, around 11 p.m., I got knocks at my bedroom window. It was Zach and his cousins. They told me to come down, so I managed to get downstairs without awakening my parents. I opened the door, and the cousins asked me if I wanted to go to the woods. I had never been out there at night before, and to be honest, I really didn't want to go. And I did tell them that, and they said, "Oh, your loss." So they went off in the direction of the tree line, and I changed my mind. So I grabbed my dad's hat and ran after them. I caught up to them, and we started to walk deeper into the woods. I was really scared, and by the look on Zach's face, he was scared too. The cousins stayed in front, shining their flashlights on the spooky trees. I noticed we were going in the direction of the well, and I know the place like the back of my hand, so I had a plan just in case shit hit the fan. We were coming up on the well, and suddenly the cousins stopped and turned off their flashlights. We asked them what was wrong. They stood still like statues. Then we went around them since we stayed behind them, and I froze as well. There was a person standing in front of the well, not looking in our direction, thankfully. So I also stood there like a statue, not knowing what to do. Then one of the cousins, I think it was Simon, whispered, "Turn around slowly and walk away slowly. Don't make any sudden moves." I complied, and we all turned around and started walking back slowly so that figure wouldn't even notice us. Then the terrible happened. I stood on a stick by accident and made it snap. It was loud, and we weren't far away enough from that man, so we all stopped again. I looked back, and the figure was now looking at us. Oh, I almost fainted. Then Danny screamed, "Run!" and we all floored it. I dropped my hat while running back, but I didn't stop to pick it up. I had no idea if the figure was following us, since all of our footsteps made it hard to make out. I didn't look back either, so I didn't know. We all managed to make it back safely, thankfully. I ran into my house and slammed the door shut. My parents were awake, and I got shouted at by my parents, and I was grounded for a week. But they also looked really relieved, and my mom hugged me and said, "I'm so glad you're safe." I was confused and asked them what they were so worried about. Then they told me something that made me even more scared. They told me that recently an escaped killer was on the loose, and he was last spotted in our area. And when my dad saw that I wasn't in my room, since he would usually check up on me, they thought I'd been kidnapped, and they were about to call the police as I came through the door. So after hearing that, I started crying. My parents asked me why. I told them what happened. Their faces were full of horror after telling them that, so they called the police immediately. Later on, the police arrived, and I explained everything to them. They said that they would take a look in the woods, so they did. A half hour later, they came back with nothing, but they said that the next day they'd bring more cops to search the area some more, and warned me not to go into the woods again, so I obliged. I could barely sleep that night because I was so afraid that the man would come for me. So the next day, more cops came to our farm and started investigating the woods. They also went to Zach's house, and my mom came in and said she found my dad's hat on the doorstep. I remember that last night I dropped it out in the woods. How did it get on the doorstep? So I thought about some more, and the man in the woods came to mind. I started panicking again. My parents called me down and asked me what was wrong. I told them about the hat. They had nervous looks on their faces. My dad took the hat to a cop outside, and I managed to calm down again, and for the rest of the day, I just played video games since my parents grounded me. Around lunchtime, we got a knock at the door, so I answered it, and it was Zach and his mom. Zach's mom asked me if she could talk to my parents. I told my parents they were at the door. Then they told us to go in my room and play something. So I put my ear against the door and listened. Zach's mom told my parents that Danny wasn't in the house in the morning, and after hearing the news about that creep in the woods, she began to worry. One thing didn't make sense though. All 4 of us made it out safely, so I was confused. Then Zach told me something that really scared me. He said Danny had left the house when they got back. He left while Simon and Zach were sleeping, although Zach wasn't sleeping. Zach said he looked out the window and saw him walk into the woods. He wanted to stop him, but he was too scared to go out there again, and he never came back. I asked him why he left. Zach didn't know. Then Simon came over to hang out later on. I asked him if he knew why Danny left the house. He said he had an idea. Danny always used to carry around his deceased mother's ring with him, since his mom had died a year prior. He always used to keep it in a box, and he would take it wherever he would go, and Simon checked the box in the morning, and it was empty. He must have dropped it while we were running from that guy last night, he said. After that day, as weeks went by, the guy in the woods was never caught. The cops started an investigation on Danny's disappearance, but was also never found, and me and Zach never went back into the woods again. Once we reached 18, we bought a house together and became roommates. Nothing's better than having a roommate as your best friend. I'm 25 now, and I live with my girlfriend, and I still hang out with Zach. But even after all that time, I still think about that night every day, and I probably will for the rest of my life. At the time this happened, I was about 5 or 6 years old. I was finishing up preschool and starting primary school. My neighbor's house was located on the corner of my road and another road. Their front door faced the other road, and there was a field across the road from their front yard. My neighbor's house was a double-story. Their front yard was quite big, and they had no backyard. The backyard was merely a small paved area, with the back door to the house being the only noteworthy feature. I'd visit my neighbor's house literally every day after I came home from school. We'd come to and from each other via this fence that was located on the side of our property and the back of theirs. So I'd enter via their back door. So one day I visited them as usual and spent the day playing video games with the boy who lived there, as he was my best friend at the time. After a while, the family informed me that they were going to be heading out soon and I needed to be going right now. As they had already closed up the back door, they requested that I leave out the front door. So as I leave, they started praying. As I was rarely in the front yard, I was quite interested in all the plants they had, not to mention the family of kittens that lived up front. Eventually, I decided not to stay too long in case I made a noise. The yard's shape resembled an L because the house was situated on the corner. Around the corner, there's a wall that separates my neighbor's house from mine, and that's where I was heading. As I'm walking across the garden, I noticed a man standing at the neighbor's gate along the fence. He was just standing there and noticed me the moment I noticed him. He was dressed in all black. He just stared at me as if he was shocked to see me. I wasn't too bothered, as I knew that the gate could not be opened unless you press a button inside the house to unlock that gate. As I proceeded to walk across the yard, the man kept watching me. When I got to the corner of the yard, I noticed a second man. He was standing on the corner, on the pavement and besides the stop sign. He too was dressed in black, and he just stared at me. Looking to my right, I saw the fence I needed to climb in the distance. But as I'm looking to my right, I noticed a third man standing near the gate to my house. Like the other men, he was dressed all in black and just stared at me in silence with no emotion in his face. At this point, I felt uneasy. Not wanting to disturb my neighbor's prayers, I shot across the garden and headed toward the wall. As I started running, I noticed all 3 men started running too and followed me beside the fence. There was a pile of rocks leading up to the wall. And it was a very high wall, so if the rocks were not there, I would not have been able to climb over the wall. So as I begin to climb the rocks, the men notice I'm trying to get to the house next door, so they run over to the gate and try to open it. I'm thankful that the gate we had at the time was all rusted and took a lot of effort to get it open. As the 3 men struggled to get the gate open, I hopped over the fence and landed into the driveway of my house. I sprinted to our front door and began to knock on the door and ring the bell excessively. The 3 men were becoming frustrated with the gate, shaking it until eventually it opened. One man forced himself through the gap as I saw our front door open. I shot in the door and my dad, who opened it, closed it immediately after I entered. He seemed preoccupied with something and didn't notice the man because he didn't open the door very wide before I got inside. I ran to my room and looked out my window to the front of the house. I saw the 3 men walking away from the house in a rush, leaving the gate open. I sat in my room, heart still racing, while my 5-year-old brain realized I was almost kidnapped. I'm now 21 and realize how lucky I am that I got away that day. I don't know what the 3 men's intentions were, but I know it definitely was not good, and I'm so thankful that I got away and never saw those 3 men again. To the 3 random men who tried to kidnap me, let's never meet again.